The sound of silver cutlery against fine porcelain echoed through the main hall of La Lumiere, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. Claire Henderson balanced 3 appetizer plates on her left arm, while holding a crystal tray with champagne flutes in her right hand. 6 years working there had transformed her movements into precise choreography, almost invisible to clients who paid $850 per person just to sit in those Italian leather chairs. It was 8:15 on a Friday evening in October, and the restaurant was absolutely packed with what Claire silently called the insufferable elite. Businessmen discussing million-dollar mergers while cutting Wagyu beef fillets that cost more than Claire's monthly salary. Heiresses displaying jewelry worth enough to buy 3 apartments in the Queens neighborhood where Claire lived with her mother. Digital influencers photographing elaborate dishes they barely touched, more concerned with perfect Instagram lighting than the taste of food prepared by a chef who had trained for a decade in Paris. All united by an absolute, unquestionable, almost religious belief that the money in their pockets made them fundamentally superior to the people who served them. Claire glided between tables like a well-trained ghost. 6 years of practice had taught her the complex art of being efficient without being noticed, polite without being inviting, present but not truly existing. The black and white uniform she wore functioned as a perfect invisibility cloak. While wearing those starched clothes, she ceased to be Claire Henderson, a person with a complete history, guarded dreams, and hidden pains. She became just the waitress, an interchangeable role, completely disposable, absolutely forgettable the second she left their field of vision. Her body had memorized every movement necessary to survive in that environment. How to carry 3 plates without spilling. How to open a wine bottle without making a sound that might disturb important conversations. How to smile politely even when clients called her by snapping their fingers like she was a dog. How to respond, "Yes, sir," and "Certainly, ma'am," with a voice that showed no accumulated fatigue from 8 hours standing without a break. Table 12. Louise, the 52-year-old maitre d' who had worked there since the restaurant's opening 15 years ago, whispered as she passed the service station polishing crystal glasses. Tonight's VIP just arrived. Andrew Sullivan and guests, 4 people. They want the full tasting menu with wine pairings. 7 courses, 12 different wines. It's going to be a long night. Louis paused, his experienced eyes meeting Claire's with a silent warning she had learned to recognize over the years. And Claire, be careful with this one. This is the type who loves humiliating staff. I've seen him make waiters cry in the bathroom at other establishments. He thinks mistreating those who serve is entertaining sport. Keep emotional distance. Do your job. Don't give him openings for conversation. The less you exist to him, the better. Claire glanced discreetly at the indicated table through the Venetian mirror decorating the wall. Andrew Sullivan. Even those who didn't religiously follow business news knew that name. Real estate magnate, owner of half the skyscrapers on Park Avenue, proprietor of shopping centers in 6 states, investor in dozens of startups that turned ideas into fortunes overnight. 44 years of privileged life written in every detail of his appearance. Perfectly styled gray hair with imported product that cost $400 a bottle. A custom-made Armani suit in charcoal gray that probably cost more than Claire's car if she had one. A Patek Philippe watch on his left wrist worth enough to pay 5 years' rent on the 1-bedroom apartment where Claire lived with Donna Regina in Queens. Handmade English shoes that cost 3 minimum wages. He sat like a king on his throne, surrounded by 3 other equally well-dressed businessmen, all laughing too loud, making jokes that only made sense to those who possessed 8-figure fortunes and considered $10,000 weekend expenses insignificant. The type of man who measured his own worth by his demonstrated ability to make others feel microscopically small. The type of man who confused net worth with moral superiority. Claire took a deep breath, adjusted her immaculately clean apron, and walked to the table with an order pad in her left hand and a bottle of Icelandic mineral water that cost $80 and tasted identical to tap water in her right hand. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said with a voice trained to be pleasant but not memorable. "My name is Claire, and I'll be responsible for serving you this evening. May I start by offering water and presenting our special tasting menu?" Andrew didn't even look up from the latest model phone he held with fingers adorned by a gold ring that probably weighed 50 grams. He was typing something furiously, probably an email that would move millions of dollars from one bank account to another with the press of a button. His fingers flew over the touchscreen while he completely, absolutely, totally ignored Claire's existence standing less than a meter away. The other three businessmen continued their animated conversation about a recent tech company acquisition, also without acknowledging Claire's presence. To them, she was part of the decor, as notable as the chair they sat in or the painting on the wall. Perhaps less notable, because at least paintings were occasionally discussed. Claire remained there, waiting, holding the heavy crystal bottle that began to make her right arm tingle. 10 seconds passed like minutes. 20 seconds dragged like hours. 30 seconds that felt like an eternity of deliberate invisibility. She knew it was intentional. Men like Andrew constantly did this to establish an invisible but absolutely rigid hierarchy, to demonstrate that their time was infinitely more valuable than any employee's time. It was a silent power game that Claire had literally witnessed hundreds of times during 6 years serving Manhattan's elite. Finally, after almost a full minute of calculated waiting, Andrew put his phone in the inner pocket of his jacket and looked at her. Not at her eyes, of course. Men like him rarely looked waitresses in the eyes. Not out of shyness or politeness, but because looking in the eyes meant recognizing humanity, and recognizing humanity would make it harder to treat them as functional, decorative objects. His gaze swept Claire from top to bottom with the same casual attention one gives furniture when entering a room, evaluating whether she was adequately decorative for the sophisticated environment, whether she matched the restaurant's general aesthetic. "Water," he said abruptly, pushing an empty Baccarat glass that cost $300 toward Claire without any ceremony, as if kicking a stone on the path. "And bring the menu. We already know what we want, but my girlfriend insists on seeing the options. Women, right? Always need visual validation, even when we've explained everything perfectly." The other men at the table laughed at the sexist joke with enthusiasm disproportionate to its actual humor, laughter that served more to reinforce social hierarchy among them than to express genuine amusement. Claire maintained a neutral expression while serving water with a movement practiced thousands of times, a skill she had perfected over the years like an actress perfects a character. Never show visible discomfort, never display legitimate indignation. Smile politely but not effusively, and continue serving as if deaf to the casual insults falling from those men's mouths like breadcrumbs falling on a Persian rug. "I'll get the menus immediately, sir," she said, turning to fulfill the order. "And don't take long," Andrew added without looking at her, already returning attention to his phone. "We don't have all night. Some people have important commitments. We don't sit around waiting for slow service." Claire bit the inside of her cheek, a technique she had developed to maintain composure. The small physical pain helped not respond to the larger emotional pain. Andrew's girlfriend arrived 10 minutes later in a whirlwind of expensive perfume and Louboutin heels that made characteristic sounds against Italian marble. Camilla Costa, 28 years old, with platinum blonde hair that cost $2,000 monthly to maintain, a red Versace dress that had cost $15,000, a Hermes Birkin bag on her arm worth more than a brand new economy car, and an expression of permanent existential boredom on her perfectly made-up face. Model, or ex-model, or aspiring model who never got really big contracts but caught a millionaire before beauty started naturally depreciating with age. The type of woman Andrew collected like he collected penthouse apartments in noble neighborhoods, more a visible status symbol than a human being with her own complex personality. "Honey, you took long," Andrew said, but there was no real warmth in his voice. It was a performative complaint made for an audience. "I already ordered appetizers for everyone. I hope you're hungry." Camilla sat gracefully, adjusting her expensive dress. "Sorry, darling. Traffic was impossible. And my esthetician was late. You know how it is." During the meal that followed, Claire served 6 different elaborate courses prepared by a chef who had studied molecular gastronomy at Michelin restaurants in Europe, changed silver cutlery 8 times following strict formal dinner protocol, filled Riedel crystal glasses with 12 different wines, each costing between $500 and $3,500 per bottle, answered questions with perfectly calibrated mechanical politeness, endured comments ranging from casual condescension to deliberate cruelty. Andrew treated each interaction with Claire as a strategic opportunity to demonstrate superiority to friends and girlfriend. It was a continuous performance of power, theater where he was director, screenwriter, and lead actor, and Claire was a disposable prop. "This wine is the wrong temperature," he declared dramatically after the sommelier served a 1982 Chateau Margaux Bordeaux that cost $3,500 a bottle and had been stored in a digitally climate-controlled wine cellar. "Don't you people know how to serve wine properly? What kind of establishment is this? You charge absurd prices and can't even get the basics right." Claire knew perfectly well the wine was at the ideal temperature of 61 degrees Fahrenheit. Marcel, the sommelier, had worked 15 years at 3 Michelin star restaurants in France and knew more about wine than Andrew would ever know even if he lived 3 lifetimes. But it didn't matter at all. For men like Andrew, complaining was a way to establish territorial dominance, to constantly remind everyone in the room that he was the customer, temporary king of that delimited space, ephemeral god with absolute power over everyone's experience. "I sincerely apologize, sir," Claire responded with a voice trained not to show real emotion. "I'll ask the sommelier to bring another bottle immediately and personally ensure perfect temperature." "You better," Andrew grumbled loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "For the absurd price they charge here, I expected truly decent service. But it seems anyone can be a waiter these days. There's no quality standard in hiring anymore. Any nobody without proper education can put on a uniform and pretend professionalism." The words pierced Claire like invisible pins carefully placed under skin. Anyone. As if serving tables professionally didn't require photographic memory for complex orders, physical resistance to stand 8 hours without breaks, superhuman emotional control not to respond to constant insults, social skill to read clients and anticipate needs. As if the 6 years she had meticulously dedicated to perfecting that profession meant absolutely nothing in the eyes of a man who had probably never worked a full physical day in his entire life. But Claire said nothing. She just smiled politely, but not enthusiastically, bowed her head in silent deference. She had practiced in the mirror until it was perfect, and went to get a new bottle of equally perfect wine that would be equally criticized, because criticism wasn't about wine. It was about power. It was about humiliation. It was about constantly reminding Claire of her place in American society's invisible but absolutely rigid hierarchy. The dinner continued, dragging on for 3 exhausting hours. 3 hours of Andrew dominating conversations with stories of business conquests that sounded more like military campaign reports where employees were acceptable casualties, necessary collateral damage for victory. 3 hours of jokes that weren't funny, but everyone laughed because Andrew was paying the bill. 3 hours of Claire serving silently, cleaning discreetly, smiling mechanically, being treated like part of the furniture, until dessert arrived. Claire was carefully serving the petit four, small, elaborate sweets the pastry chef had spent 6 hours preparing, when she heard Andrew mention a word that made her heart tighten painfully. University. "At NYU, of course," he was saying to his friends with that particular tone of someone telling an especially funny joke, voice loaded with sophisticated disdain. "My nephew, Raphael, categorically insisted on studying there. Said he wanted the real, authentic experience of American public education. I warned him repeatedly he'd mix with riffraff, with nobodies with no future, but idealistic young people don't listen to advice from those who really know the world." Predictable result? Lost a whole year having classes with mediocre professors earning shameful salaries and classmates who can barely write their own names correctly. The other businessmen laughed with performatic enthusiasm, shaking their heads in tribal solidarity. Public university as shared joke. The education of millions of Americans as entertainment for those who could pay tuitions costing more than an average person's annual salary. Exactly, Eduardo agreed, a 38-year-old businessman who owned a chain of luxury gyms. "My son is at Columbia paying $7,000 a month, and the education is worth every penny. Real professors, real students, networking that actually matters. Public university is a national joke. Government wastes money educating people who'll never use their diplomas for anything significant." Claire felt her hands tremble uncontrollably as she delicately placed elaborate sweets on the table. NYU. The word echoed in her mind like a funeral bell ringing repeatedly. New York University, where she had studied 3.5 years of her life. where she had been one of the best students in the competitive economics program, where professors Andrew disdainfully called mediocre, had completely changed her life, opened her mind to world complexities, given intellectual tools to understand economic systems in ways no executive self-help book could ever teach. 3 years at NYU lived with absolute intensity. 3 years religiously waking at 5 in the morning to catch 2 packed buses to campus in Manhattan. 3 years precariously balancing demanding classes, poorly paid internships at NGOs doing real work but having no budget, and night shifts serving tables to pay for expensive Xeroxed texts and used books bought at thrift stores. 3 years building something significant, becoming someone with her own voice, determinedly walking toward a future where she wouldn't be invisible, where she'd be a respected economist working on public policies to reduce inequality she knew intimately. Until her mother's cancer diagnosis changed everything instantly. Until SUS doctors explained with tired expressions that treatment would take a minimum of 6 months to start, due to enormous waiting lists, when the aggressive disease needed to be attacked immediately for real survival chances. Until Claire discovered saving her own mother's life cost $180,000 at a private clinic with a renowned oncologist, an amount that for Andrew Sullivan was an insignificant Miami weekend price with his girlfriend, but for Claire was an absolutely impossible, unreachable, astronomically unpayable sum. Until she froze her program mid-5th semester with a broken heart and returned to the restaurant full-time, working brutal double shifts, taking absolutely all possible offered overtime, mechanically smiling at clients who treated her like furniture while each painfully saved dollar meant one more week of life-saving chemotherapy for Donna Regina, one more precious chance for her mother to survive. And she had miraculously survived. Donna Regina was alive, in remission for 3 years, crocheting in the one-bedroom apartment in Queens, watching old soap operas and caring for plants in the small window, never fully knowing her daughter had sacrificed her own brilliant future to ensure she had a minimally dignified future. You understand perfectly why I never, ever let my son attend these dubious academic environments? Andrew continued preaching, completely oblivious to the devastating fact there was a woman half a meter away whose entire life had been brutally defined by the structural inequalities he treated as dinner jokes. At his private university, everyone is the son of successful businessmen or important executives. Valuable networking from day one of class. That's real quality education. You learn from people who are already proven winners, not from these nobodies who delusionally think a public diploma is worth anything in the serious job market. Nobodies. The word hung in the air-conditioned air like invisible poison. Claire finished serving sweets with imperceptibly trembling hands and was about to discreetly step away when Andrew, without even looking minimally in her direction, extended his arm wide and deliberately, purposefully bumped her elbow. The silver tray with the last 2 petit fours wobbled dangerously. Claire managed to balance with reflexes developed over years, but one of the elaborate sweets fell onto the imported Persian rug that cost more than a brand-new economy car. The silence that followed was instantaneous, absolute, and embarrassing. Andrew slowly looked at the sweet fallen on the expensive rug, then at frozen Claire, then at friends watching with morbid interest, then back at Claire. A cruel smile began forming gradually at the corners of his mouth. It was the specific type of smile of an experienced predator who just spotted perfectly vulnerable prey. "What incredible incompetence," he said, voice cutting silence like sharp broken glass. "Can't even hold a simple tray properly? This is the type of incompetent employee they hire here? That's why this establishment is losing prestige." Claire felt her face burn as if she'd been publicly slapped. She knew perfectly well he had bumped into her on purpose. Everyone at the table knew too. Luis, watching from afar, knew. But no one would say absolutely anything. The customer is always unquestionably right, especially when the customer is a millionaire who can buy and sell the entire restaurant without blinking. "I sincerely apologize, sir," she said, voice coming out firmer than expected despite the internal emotional storm. "I'll get another sweet immediately." "No." Andrew raised his hand imperiously, like a Roman emperor denying clemency to a defeated gladiator. "Don't bother. I've completely lost my appetite. Hard to eat when service is so incompetent and disorganized. I imagine it's because they hire anyone without real adequate qualifications. Probably someone who didn't even finish basic high school, right? Zero formal education?" His eyes finally met Claire's directly. not with genuine interest or curiosity about her as a person, but with that calculated look of someone about to crush an ant and wants to consciously savor every second of absolute power. Mr. Sullivan, Luis, the maître d', quickly approached with a worried expression, desperately trying to extinguish the fire before it spread, destroying the establishment's reputation. I deeply regret the unfortunate incident. We will, of course, remove dessert from the bill and offer a complimentary digestive from the house. It's absolutely not about money, Luis, Andrew said without taking predatory eyes off Claire, visibly enjoying her discomfort. It's about quality standards. It's about hiring genuinely qualified people. Look at her. I'll bet my fortune she never had decent formal education. Probably doesn't know the basic difference between red and white wine. And you think she can serve sophisticated clients paying premium prices? Claire felt something fundamental violently rupturing inside her chest. A floodgate she had kept carefully closed for 6 exhausting years. 6 years swallowing daily humiliations. 6 years smiling politely at gratuitous insults. 6 years being invisible, acceptable, small enough not to bother truly important people. 6 years was more than enough time. Mr. Sullivan, Claire heard her own voice saying with surprising clarity, sounding strangely calm considering the storm emotionally roaring internally. May I ask you a question? The entire restaurant seemed to cinematically freeze. Waitresses didn't ask direct questions. Waitresses didn't initiate unsolicited conversations. Waitresses certainly, absolutely, never interrupted VIP clients who were in the middle of publicly humiliating them. Conversations at nearby tables gradually ceased. Waiters stopped serving. Even kitchen noise seemed to diminish. Everyone sensed something significant was about to happen. Andrew blinked, genuinely surprised by the audacity. For a very brief second he almost seemed admired by the courage. Then the cruel smile returned, even wider, more confident. Sure. Ask whatever you want. This should be entertaining. Let's see where the little nobody goes with this. You mentioned earlier that quality education comes exclusively from expensive private universities and networking with businessmen's sons, Claire said, voice maintaining respectful tone but carrying something new, a firmness that made people at nearby tables discreetly turn to observe. May I ask what exactly was your academic training? The question hung in the air-conditioned air like a hand grenade whose pin had just been pulled. Andrew narrowed his eyes suspiciously. What exactly does that have to do with anything relevant? Genuine curiosity, Claire responded, voice still polite but carrying growing firmness. You seem to have very strong and categorical opinions about education. I naturally imagine they come from deep and well-founded personal experience. I studied business administration at Columbia University, Andrew said, evident pride in his elevated voice. One of the best, if not the best private university in the entire country. Completely different from those public universities full of mediocre people and failed professors you mentioned. I understand perfectly. Claire nodded thoughtfully. And did you finish the program completely? Andrew's face visibly darkened. What exactly are you insinuating? I'm not insinuating absolutely anything, sir. Claire maintained respectful but firm tone. I'm just asking directly if you completed your full undergraduate degree. It's a simple question requiring a yes or no answer. I completed 3 years of the program, Andrew said, voice getting visibly harder. Then I dropped out because my father died unexpectedly, and I needed to urgently assume the family's established businesses. Real practical experience is worth infinitely more than any diploma framed on the wall. I absolutely agree, Claire said. Experience is worth a lot. So, to summarize, you don't possess a complete university degree, but you directly inherited an already extremely well-established and profitable company from your father. Correct? Andrew's friends exchanged profoundly uncomfortable looks. This was rapidly going into very dangerous territory. Camilla, the girlfriend, looked alternately between Claire and Andrew like someone watching a car accident in slow motion, simultaneously horrified and unable to look away. Exactly where do you want to go with this? Andrew asked, voice low and dangerous. Nowhere specific, sir. Claire maintained respectful tone, but there was something fundamentally new in her posture. Her shoulders were straighter than ever, her chin more raised, her eyes meeting his directly. Just objectively observing that you are severely judging the education quality of people you don't know absolutely anything about, based on unfounded prejudices about public universities, when you yourself didn't complete your own undergraduate degree and had the extraordinary luck to inherit a fortune meticulously built by another person over decades. The silence that followed was so dense, so absolute, that Claire could hear her own heart beating acceleratedly in her ears. Andrew stood up slowly, deliberately. He was 6 inches taller than Claire and was absolutely accustomed to using physical height to intimidate smaller people. "Are you openly disrespecting me?" "No, sir," Claire responded, looking directly into his eyes without looking away or blinking. "I'm just pointing out objective facts. You continuously disrespected me for 10 straight minutes, making completely unfounded assumptions about my education and qualifications. I thought it fair to clarify things." "Claire," Luis was having a visible, silent, nervous breakdown, practically running toward the table. "Claire, please, let's resolve this privately." "No." Andrew raised his hand authoritatively, stopping the maitre d'. "I want to hear this completely. I want to hear exactly what this waitress has to say about qualifications. So, enlighten me. Where did you study? What impressive training do you have that allows you to question one of New York's most successful businessmen?" "I studied economics at New York University," Claire said, voice clear and firm, echoing through the silent restaurant. "That same public university full of mediocre people you mentioned disparagingly earlier. I was approved in 3rd place among 8,247 candidates in the extremely competitive entrance exam. I maintained a 9.2 GPA for 3.5 years. I won 2 academic merit awards for papers on structural economic inequality and income concentration in contemporary America." Each word was a silent bomb, systematically exploding in that temple of luxury and privilege. "I was a macroeconomics monitor for 2 consecutive semesters," Claire continued, each word gaining strength. "Coordinator of an extension project offering free financial consulting to micro-entrepreneurs from underprivileged communities in Queens, the Bronx, and Harlem. And I was accepted into a master's program at Columbia with a full CAPE scholarship before." She stopped abruptly. The next part was too personal, too painful, too vulnerable. "Before," Andrew pressed, but the tone had changed. It was no longer mocking or cruel. It was cautious, almost defensive. "Before what exactly?" "Before I froze the program in the 5th semester," Claire completed, voice breaking slightly for the first time, "to pay for my mother's cancer treatment. Because in America, Mr. Sullivan, people who don't inherit ready-made fortunes need to make impossible choices between education and family, between promising future and immediate survival. And I chose my mother without hesitating a second." The silence now was qualitatively different. It wasn't embarrassed or tense. It was reverent, almost sacred. At nearby tables, clients had completely stopped eating to observe. Waiters circulating had frozen in positions, witnessing something they had never seen in that temple of privilege and money. "And you know what I learned, Mr. Sullivan?" Claire continued, voice growing in emotional intensity. "In these 6 interminable years serving tables at this and other restaurants, I learned that the richest men are often the most existentially empty, that people who never truly worked physically love giving condescending sermons about the value of work, that those who inherited absolutely everything love pretending they conquered everything through their own merit, and that casual cruelty toward those who serve is the favorite entertainment of those who were never served, of those who never needed to smile at insults to pay rent." "Claire," Luis was white as paper. "Claire, you need to stop now. This will cost your job." "Why?" She turned to the maitre d' with an expression mixing pain and liberation. "Because I'm speaking uncomfortable truths that disturb? Because I'm breaking the carefully maintained illusion that being rich automatically makes someone better, smarter, more deserving of basic respect." She turned back to Andrew, who stood there completely immobile, face a frozen mask of genuine shock and impotent rage. "You called me incompetent without reason," Claire said, voice trembling not from fear but from 6 years of compressed rage finally finding explosive outlet. "You treated me like disposable furniture for 3 hours. Made depreciative jokes about public university as if it were a hilariously absurd concept for poor people to try to educate themselves. And all this while being respectfully served by someone who probably knows more about economics, politics, and social inequality than you will ever know, even if you live 100 years. You're fired, Andrew finally managed to say, but voice came out weak, without the usual weight of absolute authority. You can't fire me. Claire smiled for the first time in years, a sad but deeply liberating smile. You're not my boss, but you don't need to worry about that. She carefully removed her apron and placed it on the table, among French porcelain plates and expensive baccarat crystals. I resign here and now. I won't smile politely at gratuitous insults anymore. I won't pretend being invisible is acceptable anymore. And I definitely won't serve men who erroneously believe inherited money as proof of moral or intellectual superiority. Claire, the restaurant manager, had suddenly appeared, attracted by the growing commotion. His face was red with barely contained rage and professional panic. This is absolutely unacceptable. You gravely disrespected our VIP client. You're immediately fired, without prior notice, without recommendation letter, without references. That's fine, Claire said with surprisingly light voice. 6 years here were more than enough. 6 years being nobody so important people can feel they're someone special. She looked one more time at Andrew, who was still standing there, mouth slightly open, slowly processing the incomprehensible fact that someone he considered beneath consideration had just systematically destroyed his self-image in public. And Mr. Sullivan, Claire said, voice soft but carrying weight that made each word resonate through the silent restaurant. About that question you asked earlier. Whether I had decent formal education? The answer is yes. I had extraordinary professors who taught me not just economics and mathematics, but critical thinking, deep social analysis, and the fundamental difference between human value and market price. Public university professors, working in precarious conditions with shameful salaries, but passionately dedicated to educating people who can't pay tuitions costing entire salaries. She picked up her old bag from under the service counter. I learned a lot from them, Claire finalized, but the most important lesson was this: human dignity has no price, and I don't negotiate mine for generous tips, no matter how much money you put on the table. And then Claire Henderson, former waitress at La Lumiere restaurant, former brilliant economics student at NYU, determinedly walked toward the door of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, under the absolutely astonished eyes of 50 wealthy people who for the first time in their entire lives had witnessed someone from below looking directly at someone from above and saying with absolute clarity, "You are not better than me." The revolving door closed behind her with a definitive sound. Claire pushed through the restaurant's revolving door and felt the cold October New York air hit her face like a refreshing slap. Her hands trembled violently now that adrenaline began gradually dissipating from her system. What the hell had she done? She had just deliberately thrown away 6 years of stable employment, completely burned professional references, probably ended any realistic chance of working at a high-end restaurant again. And yet, walking down Fifth Avenue with her wrinkled uniform and old bag hanging on her shoulder, Claire felt something she hadn't experienced in too long a time: intact dignity. Her legs trembled slightly as she walked without specific destination. Luxury shop window lights illuminated the sidewalk. Elegant couples passed, laughing, leaving expensive restaurants for equally expensive bars. No one looked at her. She was invisible again, but this time by her own choice, not by imposition. Her cell phone vibrated insistently in her pocket. It was a message from Camila Rodriguez, the head chef at La Lumiere, who had witnessed everything from the small window separating kitchen from main hall. "Girl, you're completely crazy." But what an incredible speech. The entire kitchen stopped to watch. Half the waiters are applauding hidden in the locker rooms. The other half thinks you signed your professional death sentence. I think you did what none of us had the courage to do in 20 years working in this horror circus. Claire smiled weakly at the phone screen. She sat on a bench in Central Park, where she sometimes came after exhausting shifts to clear her head before catching 2 packed buses back to Queens. The sky was surprisingly clear, rare for polluted New York, and stars began appearing timidly. Another message arrived quickly, this time from Luis, the maître d'. "Claire, I need to tell you that you profoundly scared and inspired me at the same time. In 15 years working with elite clientele, I've never seen anyone respond that way. Manager Philippe is furious, obviously. Already called all high-end restaurants in the city to badmouth you. But between us, Andrew Sullivan deserved every word. That man has a documented history of humiliating employees. Someone needed to say that. I deeply regret it cost your job. If you need a reference, call me privately. I'll help however I can." More messages began arriving in cascade. Apparently someone had filmed part of the confrontation. Not the humiliating beginning, where Andrew treated her like trash, but the crucial moment when Claire responded, her voice firm and clear, enumerating academic qualifications, systematically dismantling his arrogance with devastating facts and unshakable dignity. The video was rapidly circulating in a WhatsApp group of New York restaurant employees. Then it appeared on Twitter with the caption, "Waitress destroys arrogant customer." Then on TikTok with dramatic music. Then on Instagram with edited cuts for maximum emotional impact. Within 2 vertiginous hours, "Waitress destroys arrogant customer with facts and logic" was among the most commented topics on American social media, competing with political scandals and celebrity gossip. Claire watched her own video with a disconcerting mixture of horror and fascination. She saw herself as others saw her in that transformative moment. A young woman, visibly tired but absolutely unshakable, looking into a powerful man's eyes and speaking truths most people only think silently but never verbalize for fear of consequences. The comments were a chaotic tsunami of passionate support and fierce criticism. "Absolute queen! Finally someone put these arrogant rich people in their place." She was right about absolutely everything. American Public University is excellent. I studied with people from NYU who were infinitely better prepared than any private school daddy's boys. But she lost her job. Was it really worth it? Now how will she pay this month's bills? Dignity doesn't pay rent. This type of proud attitude only hurts those who really need to work. Now she burned her entire career for momentary pride. Andrew Sullivan is a serious and respected businessman. This girl is just looking for her 15 minutes of social media fame. Claire read comments in growing silence. The person who wrote about dignity not paying rent was technically right. She had thrown away financial stability for a moment of wounded pride. But reading for pride reduced everything to ego, when in reality it was about something much bigger and deeper. It was about preserving the last piece of herself that daily indignity threatened to completely destroy. The phone rang stridently, interrupting the thought spiral. Unknown number. Claire almost didn't answer, but something indefinable made her press the green button. "Hello? Claire Henderson?" a professional female voice asked from the other side. "My name is Beatriz Torres. I'm executive producer of the program American Voices on NBC. I saw the video circulating explosively on social media. We would very much like to invite you for an interview tomorrow night in prime time." Claire blinked repeatedly, processing surreal information. A national TV program wanted to interview her. "I don't know if that's a good idea," she began saying hesitantly. "Claire," Beatrice interrupted gently but firmly, "your story is touching millions of people right this moment. Workers who are treated as invisible every day. People who need to swallow humiliations to keep jobs. You gave powerful voice to something many people feel intensely but can never express. And you need to tell your complete version of the story before others tell distorted and harmful versions." Claire thought about her mother, who was probably already sleeping in the small Queens apartment, with no idea her daughter's life had turned completely upside down. She thought about how she'd explain she was unemployed for responding to a customer. She thought about how they'd pay next month's rent. But she also thought about all the times she had lowered her head to insults, about all the colleagues who did the same daily, about all invisible workers who sustained the rich's lifestyle while being treated as less than human. "I accept," Claire finally said, "but with one non-negotiable condition. I want you to also interview other waiters, other service workers. This isn't just about me. It's about millions of people living this reality every day." "Perfect," Beatrice responded, and Claire could hear genuine smile in her voice. "That's exactly the angle we want to explore. I'll send a car tomorrow at 6 p.m. And Claire, thank you for having the courage to do what you did." When she hung up, Claire realized she was smiling for the first time in hours. She didn't know what the future would bring. She didn't know if she'd get another job. She didn't know if public exposure would be blessing or curse. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. For the first time in 6 interminable years, she didn't feel invisible. While Claire slowly walked to the bus stop, the night began revealing complete consequences of her actions. At La Lumiere restaurant, chaos was just beginning to unfold. Andrew Sullivan remained standing for 30 seconds after Claire left, slowly processing what had just happened. Never, in 44 years of absolutely privileged life, had anyone spoken to him that way. Employees always lowered heads submissively. Subordinates agreed enthusiastically. Even competitors at the same economic level maintained respectful tone, knowing the power he exercised. But that waitress, that nobody with cheap uniform and worn bag, had looked directly into his eyes and reduced him to nothing, using only facts about her own life and implacable logic. "Sit down, Mr. Sullivan," the restaurant manager, Philippe Dubois, said nervously. "Please, allow us to compensate for this terrible incident. The meal is completely on us naturally, and we'd like to offer a $5,000 gift certificate for future dinners." Andrew finally sat heavily, but his face was intense red, not from shame, but from growing anger. "That woman dared humiliate me publicly. I want you to sue her. Defamation, disrespect, slander, doesn't matter. Find something and sue until she has nothing left." Philippe swallowed nervously. "Sir, technically, she only stated verifiable facts about her own education and experience. There was no legal defamation. And regarding disrespect, well, we have security cameras clearly showing you provoked her first by deliberately bumping into her and making depreciative comments about her education. Are you on her side?" Andrew practically roared. "No, sir. Absolutely not," Philippe said quickly. "I'm just explaining the complicated legal situation. It would be very difficult to sue when there's video evidence you initiated the verbal conflict. Then fire everyone who witnessed this and did absolutely nothing," Andrew ordered. "Every waiter, every maitre d', every employee who was in the hall and let that woman disrespect me without intervening." Mr. Sullivan, one of Andrew's friends, Eduardo, spoke for the first time since the incident. "Maybe it's better to let this go. The video is already circulating online explosively. If you take very obvious retaliatory actions, you'll drastically worsen the situation." "Worsen?" Andrew turned sharply to his friend. "How can it worsen? A waitress humiliated me." "She didn't humiliate you," Camilla, the girlfriend, said softly. Her voice was low, but carried something new, something Andrew had never heard from her before. Deep disappointment. "You humiliated her first, all night. I saw everything, and she just responded with truth." Andrew looked at Camilla as if she had just betrayed sacred alliance. "You're on her side too?" "I'm not on anyone's side," Camilla said, but her eyes told a different story. "I'm just saying that maybe, for the first time in your life, you met someone who won't passively accept being treated as inferior. And honestly, I think you needed this lesson a long time ago." The silence that followed was colder than any word Andrew could have said. Camilla stood up elegantly, grabbed her expensive Birkin bag, and left without looking back, heels making determined sound against marble. Later, Claire would discover Camilla had ended the relationship that night, telling Andrew she could no longer pretend not to see the man he really was beneath the money. Meanwhile, on social media, the video exploded exponentially. Not just the original clip, but people began sharing their own stories. Hashtags emerged organically. "I am Claire," "Invisible workers," "Dignity is not negotiable." A waitress in Boston shared a detailed story of when a customer threw food in her face because the steak was too rare. A delivery driver in Philadelphia told about being called a useless bum by a luxury condo resident when he was 5 minutes late due to a traffic accident. A housekeeper in Chicago reported how her employer forbade her from using the house bathroom, saying, "Poor people bring diseases." Each story was a painful window into reality wealthy people preferred not to see, and Claire, without wanting or planning, had become a symbol of silent revolution. A wave of workers deciding they wouldn't accept being treated as less than human anymore. But not all attention was positive or supportive. The next morning, Claire woke to 847 messages on her phone. Many were enthusiastic support, but others were veiled or explicitly violent threats. People defending Andrew, saying she had been mouthy, disrespectful, that she didn't know her place. Some comments were misogynistic, others classist. Several were simultaneously both. "That one's gonna die in the gutter. No restaurant will hire her anymore. She'll see what real hunger is. Who does this waitress think she is? Customer is always right. If she can't take it quietly, Find another job. Andrew Sullivan is a respected businessman who generates thousands of jobs. This girl is just looking for her pathetic 15 minutes of fame. Claire read comments while having coffee with her mother in the small apartment. Donna Regina sat at the table covered with plastic cloth, holding her phone with trembling hands, watching the video for the 5th consecutive time. "My daughter," she finally said, tears running down her face marked by years of hard work and defeated illness. "You sacrificed so much for me, and now you're unemployed because of that terrible man." "I'm not unemployed because of him, Mom," Claire gently corrected. "I'm unemployed because I chose dignity over submission. And you know what? For the first time in 6 years, I don't regret absolutely anything." Donna Regina extended calloused hands across the table and held Claire's. "When you were little, I told you education was the only thing no one could take from you. And last night you proved it. You used everything you learned, all your intelligence, to defend not just yourself, but all people like us who work hard and are treated as invisible." Claire felt eyes welling up. She hadn't cried in years, had learned to swallow tears along with humiliations. But there, in the small kitchen where they had celebrated small victories and survived great defeats, she allowed herself to cry. The phone rang stridently. Another unknown number. Claire answered with growing caution. "Claire Henderson?" a male voice asked. "My name is Dr. Alberto Mendez. I'm tenured professor in the economics department at Columbia. I saw the viral video. I also saw you mentioned studying at NYU. I'd like to know if you still have interest in completing your undergraduate degree." Claire almost dropped the phone. "What?" "We have a special program for students who needed to freeze their program for family or financial reasons," Dr. Alberto explained. "It's called the Return Program. Offers full scholarship, transportation assistance, food assistance, and even a small study stipend to cover basic costs. I personally verified your record at NYU. Your GPA is excellent." "You'd be an ideal candidate." Claire looked at her mother, who was observing with cautious hope shining in her eyes. "But I froze 4 years ago. A lot has changed. I've changed. Knowledge has no expiration date," Dr. Alberto said. "And if a fraction of what you demonstrated in that video reflects your real capacity for economic analysis and articulation of complex ideas, you'd be a valuable asset to any academic program." When she hung up 15 minutes later, Claire had an interview scheduled for the following week. Real possibility of returning to university. Chance to finish what she had started 4 years ago. But the real surprise was still to come. The interview on American Voices aired the following Thursday in prime time. Claire wore her best outfit, which was still modest compared to television standards, but was clean and well cared for. Donna Regina had ironed the blouse 3 times, obsessively making sure every fold was absolutely perfect. The studio was profoundly intimidating with almost blinding bright lights and giant cameras pointing like cannons. But when Beatriz began the interview, Claire felt strangely calm. Perhaps because she was speaking her authentic truth, not pretending to be someone she wasn't. "Claire," Beatriz began, "your video went viral with over 15 million views in less than a week. You've become a symbol of the struggle millions of American workers face daily. How do you feel?" "Honestly," Claire took a deep breath. "Scared. I never wanted to be a symbol of anything. I just wanted someone to treat me like a human being, worthy of basic respect." I think the video went viral because many people deeply identified with that. How many people wake up every day knowing they'll be treated as invisible? That they'll smile politely at insults because they desperately need the job? That shouldn't be normalized. You mentioned in the video you studied economics at NYU. Can you tell us more about that in detail? Claire told her story. Not just dry facts, but real emotions. She talked about waking at 5 in the morning, about dedicated professors earning shameful salaries but completely changing lives. She talked about having to choose between promising future and family, about how the system was deliberately structured so poor people had to make impossible choices while the rich could literally have everything. My mother had aggressive cancer, Claire said, voice breaking slightly. Medicare is wonderful, but was absolutely overwhelmed. She needed immediate treatment to survive. So I froze my program and went back to the restaurant full-time, worked brutal double shifts for 2 years to pay for private clinic. And I don't regret it for a single second. My mother is alive. That's worth any diploma. The camera captured tears running down Beatriz's face. Millions of Americans watching at home cried along. "And about Andrew Sullivan?" Beatrice asked. "Do you regret how you responded?" Claire thought carefully before responding. "I don't regret defending my dignity, but I deeply regret waiting 6 years to do it. I regret all the times I lowered my head to insults. I regret inadvertently teaching men like him they can treat people like furniture without real consequences." She looked directly at the camera, knowing millions were watching. "And I want to make absolutely clear, Andrew Sullivan isn't the villain of this story. He's just an example of a system that teaches people with money they're fundamentally better than people without money. The problem isn't one arrogant rich man. The problem is a society that permits, encourages, and rewards that structural arrogance." After the interview, something extraordinary happened. Hundreds of companies began contacting, offering employment. Restaurants wanted to hire her as manager. Tech companies offered well-paid positions in human resources. A publisher offered substantial advance for her to write a book about her experience, but the most surprising offer came from a completely unexpected place. "Claire," familiar voice said when she answered the phone Friday morning. "This is Dr. Alberto Mendez. I have an extraordinary proposal for you. I just spoke with the dean. We want to create a special scholarship with your name, the Claire Henderson Scholarship for Academic Return. It would be destined for students who needed to freeze their program for socioeconomic reasons. You wouldn't just return to complete your undergraduate degree, but would become ambassador of the program, helping identify and support other students in similar situations." Claire was completely speechless. "There's also concrete interest from the Department of Education," Dr. Alberto continued. "They want to create a national program based on your case. Academic return with financial support for students who needed to abandon university due to family emergencies. We're talking about potentially helping tens of thousands of people. But not just the academic world was responding. Labor unions began using Claire's story as an example in awareness campaigns about labor rights and dignity in the workplace. Restaurants throughout America implemented mandatory training on respectful treatment of employees. Some establishments created explicit zero-tolerance policies for customer verbal abuse against staff. And Andrew Sullivan, his life also changed, but in the completely opposite direction. The video didn't just go viral, it was meticulously dissected. Investigative journalists began examining his businesses. They discovered questionable labor practices in his companies. Employees who had been unjustly fired began speaking publicly. Cases of moral harassment came to light. A federal revenue investigation was opened about possible tax evasion. Millionaire contracts with companies valuing public image were canceled. His fortune remained intact, but his reputation was destroyed. But the most significant change was internal. 3 months after the incident, Andrew Sullivan did something completely out of character. He asked to meet with Claire. She almost refused. But something in the message he sent through intermediaries made her accept. Not naive hope for his redemption, but curiosity about what a man accustomed to always being right would say when confronted with consequences of being wrong. They met at a simple cafe in Brooklyn, not a luxury establishment, but a common place where common people drank coffee. Andrew arrived alone, without advisors or security. He wore expensive but discreet clothes. He seemed smaller somehow, as if the last months had literally shrunk his physical presence. "Claire," he began, and there was something fundamentally different in his voice. The automatic arrogance had been replaced by something that almost sounded like genuine humility. "I don't know how to start this. How about with a genuine apology?" Claire suggested, without rancor, but without softening things. "Apologies don't seem sufficient for what I did," Andrew said. "But even so, I'm deeply sorry. Not just for what I did that specific night, but for entire years of treating people like you. You said I wasn't the villain of the story, but you were wrong. I was the villain in hundreds of stories. I systematically humiliated employees, fired people without just cause on a whim, treated human dignity as negotiable commodity." Claire studied his face carefully, looking for signs of calculated manipulation. But what she saw seemed genuine. A man confronting for the first time the horrible image of who he had really been. "What changed?" she asked directly. "Everything," Andrew responded. "I lost my girlfriend. Several friends stopped calling. Companies don't want association with my brand. But more than that, I had to see repeatedly that video. I had to see dozens of people telling stories of how I humiliated them over the years. I had to confront the fact I spent 44 years being exactly the type of person my own father would have despised. He took a sip of coffee, hands trembling slightly. My father built that company from absolute nothing, Andrew continued, voice loaded with emotion. Started as a construction worker, worked 20 hours a day. When I was 10, he made me work on construction sites during school breaks, said I needed to understand the value of manual labor. But when he died and I inherited everything, I forgot all those lessons. I became exactly the type of person who would have humiliated my father when he was a young worker. Claire felt something shifting in her chest. Not pity exactly, but recognition of shared humanity. Andrew Sullivan was still a rich and privileged man, but he was also a man confronting his own failures in a way few men in his position do. "So what are you going to do now?" she asked. "Real and concrete changes," Andrew said with conviction. "Already started. Implemented minimum wage of $25 an hour in all my companies, much above legal floor. Created employee committee with real decision-making power over working conditions. Establishing $10 million education fund for employees' children. And I'm personally apologizing to every person I can remember humiliating in the last 20 years. He looked directly at Claire with eyes that seemed different. "I know this doesn't undo the damage caused. I know I seem to be doing this only because I was caught publicly. And maybe part is true. But I also discovered something in these 3 months. Living as I lived, treating people as disposable, didn't just hurt them. It hurt me. It transformed me into someone empty, cruel, fundamentally unhappy. You didn't just defend your dignity that night, Claire. You saved a piece of my humanity I didn't even know I was losing." Claire remained silent for a long moment. Finally, she said, "I can't give you absolution, Andrew. I'm not a priest and you didn't just hurt me. You hurt hundreds of people over years. But I can tell you this. Real change doesn't come from temporary guilt feelings. It comes from consistent action over time. If you really changed, prove it with actions, not beautiful words. And prove it not to me, but to every person who works for you." They talked for another hour. They didn't become friends. The distance between their realities was too great for that. But perhaps they arrived at something more important: mutual recognition of shared humanity, understanding that genuine change requires confronting uncomfortable truths about oneself. When they parted, Andrew did one last thing. He handed an envelope to Claire. "It's not a bribe or attempt to buy forgiveness," he explained. "It's a check for $180,000, the exact amount you spent treating your mother. Consider it payment for 4 years of education you lost because of my fault and the fault of the system men like me perpetuate. Use it to complete your master's. Use it to help others. Just don't refuse it out of pride, because this isn't about pride. It's about justice and reparation." Claire took the envelope, not for herself, but for what it represented. Recognition that actions have consequences, that moral debts can sometimes be partially paid in material terms, that true regret manifests in concrete reparation, not just empty words. Claire Henderson, now 29 years old, stood on the stage of the New York Public Library main auditorium. The hall was completely packed with over 1,000 people. University students, service workers, professors, journalists, social activists. She had finished not just her undergraduate degree in economics, but also completed a master's in public policy and social inequality at Columbia with honors. Her thesis, Economic Invisibility: The Social Cost of Undervalued Services, won a national award and was transformed into a book that sold over 100,000 copies. She worked as senior consultant for the Department of Education, helping implement academic return programs at public universities across the country. In the last 2 years, she had helped more than 12,000 students return to college after abandoning for socioeconomic reasons. She also maintained a monthly column in an important newspaper, writing about inequality, work, and dignity. She had become a respected voice in debates about social justice, always remembering she wasn't a hero, just someone who had the courage to say no to indignity. Donna Regina sat in the first row, in remission for 5 years. She actively participated in support groups for low-income cancer patients, helping navigate the healthcare system and connecting people to available resources. Andrew Sullivan was a few rows back, discreet. He had maintained promised changes. His companies were now nationally recognized as models of good labor practices. He created a foundation offering education scholarships for children of service workers throughout America. He hadn't completely recovered his public reputation, but perhaps had recovered something more important. Basic humanity he had lost somewhere along the way. They never became close friends, but developed deep mutual respect. Occasionally, they collaborated on social impact projects, proving genuine change is possible when people are willing to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Claire began speaking to the silent and attentive audience. 2 years ago, I was an invisible waitress. Today, I'm here as a master's in economics, public policy consultant, and apparently author of a book people actually read. People call me brave, but it wasn't courage. It was desperation. It was reaching the absolute limit of how much a person can shrink before disappearing completely. She paused, letting words resonate. I want to tell a story that's not in the book. When I was 10, my mother worked as a housekeeper for a wealthy family. One day, the employer organized a party. My mother worked 16 hours preparing everything. When the party ended and guests left, the employer called my mother and said, "Regina, thank you for working so hard. As a reward, you can eat the party leftovers before throwing them in the trash." Absolute silence in the auditorium. My mother came home that night and cried. Not because she was hungry, but because she was treated as less than the family's dog. And you know what she told me? "Daughter, study. Education is the only thing no one can take from you. It's the only thing that makes a difference between being treated like a person or like an object." Claire felt tears in her eyes. So I studied, passed in 3rd place in a competitive exam, was a good student, dreamed of being an economist, working with public policies, maybe helping change the system that made my mother be treated as less than human. And then life happened. My mother got sick, and I discovered in America, you can't be poor and have expensive disease. So I chose. Obviously, I chose my mother, but I lost my future in the process. She wiped tears. And I became what I was trying to escape, invisible worker. For 6 years, I served wealthy people, and for 6 years, I was treated like furniture, until I met Andrew Sullivan. He wasn't different from dozens of other arrogant clients. But that day, that specific night, something broke inside me, and I responded. Claire looked directly at Andrew in the audience. People think that night was about a cruel man and a courageous woman, but it wasn't. It was about a system that teaches some people they have the right to treat others as inferior, and about a person who said, "No, not anymore, not with me." She returned attention to the full audience. So I'll ask a question I ask at every talk. How many of you here have ever been treated as invisible? Raise your hand. More than 800 hands rose. And how many of you have ever treated someone as invisible? Long and uncomfortable pause. Then, slowly, hundreds of hands rose, including Claire's. Exactly. We all do this. I do this. You do this. The difference is recognizing and changing. Andrew Sullivan is here today because he recognized and is changing. That doesn't erase what he did, but it's a start. Claire concluded. The legacy of that night isn't me. It's the thousands of workers who found courage to defend their own dignity, waitresses who respond to abuse, delivery drivers who report mistreatment, housekeepers who demand respect. Invisibility still exists, but now there's resistance. There are voices saying, "I exist, I matter, I deserve dignity." The audience exploded in applause that lasted 5 minutes. Later, in the lobby, Claire spoke with students when a young 19-year-old approached. "Claire, my name is Raphael. I'm Andrew Sullivan's nephew. He mentioned you at dinner that night. He said I was wasting time at public university. Because of what you did, he completely changed. Now he funds scholarships for NYU students. And I proudly continue studying at public university, proving he was wrong." Claire smiled. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Study for yourself, not against him." Raphael nodded. "You changed my entire family. My uncle was impossible. Now he's different. Not perfect, but different." When Raphael walked away, Andrew approached. "Thank you for saying change is possible," he said quietly. "For not making me the permanent villain of the story." "You made yourself the villain," Claire said honestly. "I just held up the mirror, and you had the courage to look. That's more than most people do." Andrew nodded and walked away. Donna Regina waited at the exit with a proud smile. "My daughter became an important person," she said. "No, Mom," Claire corrected. "I always was an important person. I just needed 6 years and one night of courage for the world to notice." They walked together through New York streets, the same city where Claire had been invisible, where she had served silently, where she had shrunk to fit others' expectations. But no more. Claire Henderson existed, was seen, was heard, and more importantly, she had helped thousands of others be seen too. That night at La Lumiere restaurant, when an arrogant millionaire tried to reduce a waitress to nothing, ended up proving the opposite, that human dignity has no price, that knowledge surpasses privilege, and that sometimes a single person saying no can change the world. "You're a nobody," Andrew had said. "You're wrong. I'm somebody. I always was. You just never bothered to look," Claire had responded. And in that simple response, she transformed not just her own life, but planted seeds of change that would continue growing for generations. Because in the end, true revolution doesn't happen when the powerful decide to be kind. It happens when the invisible decide to be seen. And Claire Henderson, former waitress, economist, activist, decided to be seen. And in doing so, illuminated the path for millions of others. La Lumiere restaurant closed its doors 6 months after the incident, not due to bankruptcy, but because the owner decided to transform it into a culinary school for low-income youth. The space where Claire was humiliated now educates 200 students per year, all receiving free quality education. Sometimes Claire passes by there, looks at the building, remembers that night, and smiles. Because dignity, she discovered, is a strange seed, planted in the soil of humiliation. Watered with tears of just anger, it can grow and transform entire landscapes. And it all started with a 27-year-old waitress who decided 6 years of invisibility was enough, who looked into a powerful man's eyes and spoke the simplest and most revolutionary truth of all. "You are not better than me."